The present picture of the world would not have transformed without the contribution from many great personalities. Albert Einstein introduced the theory of relativity, allowing people to understand the universe. Nikola Tesla made modern life easy with his numerous inventions. Perhaps less well known to the general public, economist Gary Becker forever changed people's way of thinking by expanding the scope of economic studies. He saw the power of economic method to illuminate issues well beyond the pecuniary domain, transforming people's understanding of discrimination, education, labor markets, crime, and family, providing an economic interpretation of sociological behaviors. Born in 1930 in Pottsville, Pennsylvania, Gary Stanley Becker found his interest in economics while accidentally taking an economic class at Princeton University. After graduating, he immediately enrolled in the University of Chicago for his PhD degree. That was when he met perhaps the most influential figure in his pursuit of economics, who was his teacher as well as his mentor, Milton Friedman, whom Becker referred to as the greatest living teacher I ever had. Friedman gave Becker the insight that economic theory was not a game played by clever academians, but was a powerful tool to analyze the real world. In the early 1950s, during Becker's time as a PhD student, the struggle of African Americans against inequality and injustice peaked. Many companies and firms refused to hire blacks as a result of racial discrimination as well as segregation. Strongly influenced by Friedman's perspective on the purpose of economics, Becker attempted to explain the rationale behind racial discriminations in firms. His doctorate thesis, The Economics of Racial Discrimination, became one of the first efforts to explain sociological behaviors with economic studies.
He had this theory that firms would be willing to hire, like let's say they discriminate against African Americans, then they would only be willing to hire them if the wages were lower. And if you had a lot of firms that behaved that way, then in equilibrium, so in the market, you'd observe that there would be a lower wage for black workers versus white workers.
It was known to the public that discrimination provides a negative economic impact to the group that is being discriminated against. However, Becker found out in his research that such decrease of income also exists in the employers. If each of these curves represents an indifference curve with a fixed number of people hired in each firm, comparing 2 points, P1 and P2, it is shown by hiring more lower-wage African Americans instead of higher-wage whites, the firm obtains more profit. As discrimination increases, the firm actually loses profit in order to indulge the distaste of blacks. Becker's theory states, when combined together, on a graph of net income of both parties, if PO represents their income where no discrimination exists, the curve PO to P1 shows different levels of discrimination, with P1 being the point of complete segregation. Becker proves in his research that discrimination not only affects negatively on those who are discriminated against, but also the discriminators. This is a strong contradiction to Marx's view, which originally states that discrimination is the result of self-interest and should benefit the one that discriminates. Becker's theory on the implications of discrimination on both parties' income, employment rate, and occupations of those considered minorities was the first systematic analysis on the issue. It started me down a path of applying economics to social issues, a path that I have continued to follow. Upon publishing his first book based on discrimination in 1957, Becker utterly became one of the most controversial figures in the field of economics.
I think that the theories were controversial when they were first introduced because those ideas were considered very radical, actually, because I think at first people didn't even take it seriously, because they were areas of economics that nobody had really studied before.
Becker recalled in his autobiography, most economists did not think racial discrimination was economics, and sociologists and psychologists generally did not believe I was contributing to their fields. To many critics' surprises, their harsh words did not discourage Becker's study, but rather helped him in enhancing his theories. He didn't just listen to the critics, he responded to the critics. It always enriched him, said economist James Heckman. It was also after the publication of the first book that Gary Becker decided it was time for a change. Along with his first wife, Daria, and two daughters, Judy and Catherine, the family moved to New York in 1957, where Becker taught at Columbia University and conducted research at the National Bureau of Economic Research for the next 12 years. During the time, continuing his research by applying economic concepts to social issues, Becker developed series on time allocation, crime and punishments, and irrational behaviors. Starting to gain acceptance on his work due to his empirical accuracy, Becker again returned to the University of Chicago in 1970. His teaching style, recalled by his previous student Professor Todd from the University of Pennsylvania, was both intimidating and captivating.
And so every class, everybody was very nervous that Becker was going to call on them, and he would get names stuck in his head sometimes. So one time he called on me 4 classes in a row. Wow. They do that sometimes in law schools, but he liked to do that, just to randomly call on people and to ask you questions on the spot in front of everybody.
For the majority of his time at the university, however, Becker focused on researching on a topic that would ultimately lead to his most well-known theory of all time, family. During the 1900s, one of the prominent phenomena of the time was the decline in fertility rates in industrialized countries over the course of years. This contradicted the original sociological model of fertility, which predicted an increase in fertility rate as household conditions improve. In economic terms, children were considered as normal goods, meaning an increase in income should lead to an increase in the quantity of children. So how could it be explained that there's a decline in fertility rates when children were viewed as desirable items? Becker first introduced his quantity versus quality theory of fertility back in 1960, establishing a trade-off between the number of children and the resources spent on each child.
As things have changed, not everything else is equal, because they also have interest in the quality of the children, and the price of quality may decline faster than the price of quantity. So as a result, as people become higher income, they may choose to invest more in the quality of the children and have fewer children. And all that is consistent with a simple economic model of behavior.
Later extended with additional research in 1980, his paper entitled An Economic Analysis of Fertility analyzed the possible factors that determine fertility, including the economic cost and profit for having children, the relationship between family income and the number of children raised, and the uncertainty in production of children due to past experiences. This gives both economists and sociologists a much broader view of the general trend in fertility rates, allowing future predictions to be made at a higher accuracy. Becker also developed theories on the economic gain of marriage and divorce, human capital, and even allocation of resources within a household. His book, A Treatise on Family, gained wide recognition and acceptance, further pushing the scope of economics.
So there were a lot of ideas that he had that nobody else had ever even thought about in economics. So he's famous for that, like pushing economics into new areas.
Gary Becker was awarded with Nobel Prize in 1992 for having extended the domain of microeconomic analysis to a wide range of human behavior and interaction, including non-market behavior. His theories since then have been widely used to apply and develop new economic models. Economists became one of the main specialists to study discrimination, family, and many other topics that were once considered to be purely sociological. By incorporating economic analysis on sociological behaviors, Becker had forever changed the definition of economic studies and forever taking a stand in history.